دیان علائی متولد تهران است، اما تحصیلات خود را در فرانسه به پایان رسانده است و او فارغ التحصیل رشته روابط بین الملل و حقوق بشر است. از سال 1992 به عنوان نماینده جامعه بین المللی بهائیان در دفتر سازمان ملل در ژنو برگزیده شده است. خانم علائی در طی ربع قرن اخیر فعالیت‌های بسیاری در زمینه دفاع از حقوق بشر و شرکت در جلسات نهادهای مرتبط با سازمان ملل و ارائه گزارش‌ها و سخنرانی‌های انجام داده است و وضعیت جامعه بهائیان در ایران و سراسر جهان را به طور دائم پیگیری می‌کند. با دیان علائی در حالی که برای شرکت در جلسه درباره حقوق بشر در ایران در دفتر سازمان ملل آماده میشد دیدار کردیم و رو به رو سخن گفتیم.
چقدر رابطه شما با روزنامه‌نگارای ایرانی خوبه؟ یا بده؟
No, I think no, I don't think it's bad. I think that we have very, very good relations, and they're always welcome, just as you are, to come to our office and please, you can come into my office.
مرسی، خیلی ممنون. خانم علائی، مرسی. خانم علائی، چقدر شما در این سالهای اخیر به نظرتون رسیده که روزنامه‌نگارای ایرانی به این موضوع بهائیان بیشتر توجه کردن یا نه کمتر بوده؟
No, I think that there has been interest in the persecution. I think, as I mentioned to you, I think that the everything has improved. The awareness to human rights has improved, and therefore, of course, the attention also of the Iranian media has also, I mean, the Iranian-speaking media has also changed a lot towards the Baha'is, as it has towards, other human rights violations.
نقاط ضعف می‌بینید در پوشش مسائل بهائیان؟
I think that the issue still is a little bit the pressure that the Iranian government puts in labeling some people as pro-Baha'i or even Baha'i themselves, and sometimes there's also a little bit of self-censure. But I think that in general, I think that the Iranian-speaking media has been very good at reporting the violation. D'accord. Entrez, asseyez-vous, je vous installe.
خب خانم علائی، اگر ممکنه یک کمی درباره خودتون برای ما بگید.
Well, I've been working here at the Baha'i International Community for 20 years as representative to the United Nations. I myself am from an Iranian father and a French mother, so I have a Persian name, Persian look, but I grew up in France, and we have been working here in this office about trying to bring Baha'i, to contribute the Baha'i ideas to the work of the United Nations in different issues, but particularly on human rights issues, of course, and also to try to defend the Baha'is in the countries where they're persecuted, particularly in Iran.
چقدر خدمت داره این دفتر؟
So the Baha'i International Community, actually, because of the beliefs of the Baha'i faith, they have been has been involved in the work of the League of Nations. So after World War I, and then the office of the Baha'i International Community was also present at the creation of the United Nations. But of course, originally, so during the League of Nations, there was an office here in Geneva, and then of course, after the creation of the United Nations, there was an office in New York, and then slowly an office in Geneva was also reopened in a way, I would say, I think in the 70s, yes.
ولی در سالهای اخیر بوده که خیلی فعال شده.
I think that the work of the Baha'i International Community has increased as much as the Baha'i community itself has been more and more engaged in life of society in order to be able to contribute to those issues. But of course, it is true that also the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran, so since 1979, has also created a lot more work and visibility for the Office of the Baha'i International Community at the United Nations.
آیا در پیش از انقلاب هم مواردی از اذیت و آزار بهائی‌ها تو ایران بوده؟
Yes, in fact, when I mentioned actually it was not only in Iran, because when I mentioned also the League of Nations, I mean there was also some activities that the Baha'i international community took in order to defend the rights of Baha'is, not only in Iran, but also, in fact, it was also a case in Iraq. So I think that there are some issues that were brought to the United Nations, yes.
کجا بیشتر از همه جمعیت بهائیان متمرکز است؟
I think it would be very difficult to say in numbers. There are Baha'is in every country of the world. And also, you know, the numbers are quite difficult to state because the Baha'i community is a growing community. And also you have to look at the percentage of the population. So of course, a country like India, with the amount of people that it has, certainly has a very great number of Baha'is as well, and perhaps the largest number in the world. But if you look at other small countries like in the Pacific Islands or sometimes in Central America, you will see that there is a percentage of a large percentage of the population. The population is small, but a large percentage of the population that would be Baha'i in those countries.
آیا در کشورهای دیگه مواردی از مشکلاتی وجود داره برای بهائیان؟
There have been some cases of persecutions of Baha'is in other countries than Iran. There are still some issues that are pending in a number of countries, but I can say that to date, you know, there is no Baha'i who is in prison in any other country in the world than in Iran because of his or her beliefs, of course.
پس این در واقع وضعیت بهائیان در ایران از همه بدتره.
Certainly.
این وضعیت در طول این 36 سال گذشته چقدر تغییر کرده؟ یعنی جایی بوده که بهتر شده باشه؟
It's always very difficult to talk about measurement of human rights violations because the suffering on one person is important. But of course, there has been a very different pattern of behavior by the Iranian authorities regarding the persecution of the Baha'is. For example, at the beginning of the inception of the Islamic Republic, a number as you know, over 200 Baha'is have been executed in Iran. This is no longer the case. There has been many years since no Baha'i has been executed because of his belief by the Iranian authorities. Of course, we know that just 2 years ago, Mr. Atollah Rizvani was found dead in his car, and we have all reasons to believe that he was killed. Yes, in Bandar Abbas, and that he was killed because he was a Baha'i, and also that somehow the Iranian authorities have condoned this killing because they have not properly prosecuted or searched to find the person who has killed this gentleman.
این در 36 سال گذشته در واقع این مشکل و مسائل مختلفی که برای بهائیان وجود داشته به نظر شما چقدر تاثیر گذاشته روی جامعه بهائیان در داخل کشور؟ آیا باعث شده که اونا مهاجرت کنن؟ آیا باعث شده که اونا مثلا یک مقداری سازش بکنن یا دینشون رو تغییر بدن؟
Of course, some Baha'is have left Iran because of the persecutions that they face. But I think that the majority of the Iranian Baha'is have developed a behavior that can be termed into constructive resilience, which means that they neither take on the same violent or behavior of the authorities, or the retaliation of the authorities, but neither do they submit to the persecutions and go and either lose their faith or go underground. But they have decided to contribute. As Iranian citizens, as Baha'is, they want to contribute to the betterment of their countries and to the betterment of the community around them. And they have engaged in those activities, regardless of in order to serve the country, just for the improvement of the country, and they have done that regardless of the pressure that is exercised against them.
شما هر روز مسائل و مشکلات مختلفی که برای بهائیان حالا در ایران یا جاهای دیگه پیش میاد رو میشنوید. چقدر این کار برای شما سخته؟
You know, I think that it is always very difficult to hear about the suffering of other people. But at the same time, I think that what the strength that I gain is to see how much admiration I have from them, precisely because of the way that they courageously confront these sufferings, the way that they behave, the dignity that remains in them, the values that they support. This is a great source of encouragement and admiration that I have for them, and I think that that's what actually makes my work easy.
این در واقع سخنگوی جامعه بهائیان بودن چه ویژگی هایی داره، یعنی چه کارهایی شما باید انجام بدیم به طور روزمره؟
Right. So what I have to do is basically to represent the Baha'i community, but we do a lot of diverse things. So of course, as for example at this moment there is the Human Rights Council in sitting, so we attend the meetings of the Human Rights Council, we listen to the debates, we make public statements at the council, and we also participate in side events where we are on panels and we speak, and not only about the subject of Iran. For example, yesterday I was invited to speak in a panel on the impact of incitement to hatred and how interreligious dialogue and the work of various religious communities can help to improve a better understanding of the diversity of religions and combat issues like terrorism that we see that is done in the name of religion. So we work on issues of freedom of religion or belief and combating incitement to hatred, for example. Of course, when there are no sessions, then we prepare documentation to submit for those sessions, but also for some committees. For example, now Iran will be presenting its reports to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and so my colleague and myself, we have worked on a submission together with other NGOs about human rights violations of children who are Baha'is for the committee. And then we also have the various national spiritual assemblies, which are the governing bodies. You know that the Baha'i faith doesn't have any clergy, so we have elected governing bodies at the national level, and so we help coordinate or provide them for information for also their work at the national level and their contact with the authorities. Of course, we also prepare work submissions and collaborate with some special rapporteurs at the Human Rights Council. For example, clearly Mr. Ahmed Shahid, the Special Rapporteur on Iran, but also, as I mentioned, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Mr. Heiner Bielefeld, or the Special Rapporteur on minorities, Ms. Rita Itzhak, and other entities.
چطور شد که شما به عنوان سخنگوی جامعه بهائیان انتخاب شدید؟ انتخابیه یا؟
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, this is my, I've studied international relations in Paris and then in Nice, and I have a specialization both in the issues of the Middle East and in issues of human rights. I've studied human rights in Strasbourg. So, in a way, it is a little bit, I have studied to have a better understanding and to be able to perform this work. However, I think that there are a lot of other people who have done the same studies. So I'm very fortunate that it so happened that I started this to come and work in this office in this capacity.
در این سالهایی که دارین کار میکنیم با عنوان سخنگوی جامعه بهائیان، گاهی پیش اومده که فکر کنید که وضعیت مثلا توجه افکار عمومی جهانیان به موضوع بهائیان حالا در ایران یا جاهای دیگه بیشتر شده یا کمتر شده؟ چه زمانی بیشتر بوده؟
I think that the public opinion is always interested in human rights violations, and I'm not quite sure that there has been a change in the interest of the public opinion. Of course, perhaps at the beginning of the persecution of the Baha'is, people were not so familiar with those persecutions. So I think that the more there are persecutions and the longer that those persecutions unfortunately continue to take place, then the public opinion is more aware. I think that what sometimes is of concern to us is that other issues outside of human rights prevent governments from putting pressure on the Iranian government. So I think that we believe that achieving peace is the ultimate goal for everybody, and we would not want anything else. but that human rights should not be forgotten in the process.
خب یه سوالی که اینجا پیش میاد اینه که چرا دولت جمهوری اسلامی اینقدر فشار میاره به بهایی؟
I guess this is a question that should be asked of them first and foremost. So I think that they would probably be the best persons to respond, because frankly, if I think logically, I don't understand why. The Baha'is are, as a matter of principle of the Baha'i faith, they should be obeying their government. So they obey their government everywhere, including Iran. And they also have no nothing. I mean, they don't want any. The only thing they want in Iran is to have the rights like any other Iranian, and the right to profess their religion also, and that's it. So as long as whichever Iranian government will decide to give the Iranian Baha'is a right, then they will be very happy to serve the way they're doing now, but without making any other request, to serve for the promotion of the rights of everybody. And of course, I think that this issue is not only about themselves, but it's about everybody else. So for example, in other countries, you have Baha'i communities who of course push their governments to also behave towards the whole fellow citizen in a better manner, for example, by having access to certain conventions and things like that. So I don't think that it's just because the Baha'i community will have imagined all its rights in Iran that they will forget about others if others are also persecuted. Because the ultimate issue is to have the betterment of the country and not the betterment of one particular group. But I think that ultimately the goal is only to promote the well-being of everyone in Iran. So I don't see why the Iranian government is so bent on persecuting Baha'is.
وزارت اطلاعات و نیروهای امنیتی جمهوری اسلامی همچنین صدا و سیما اینجوری مدعی شدن که بهائی‌ها ارتباط دارن با دولت‌های خارجی و سازمان‌های امنیتی خارجی از جمله موساد یا MI6 و این چیزا. فکر می‌کنید چرا این پروپاگاندا همچنان 36 ساله که مدام تکرار میشه؟ چرا به اونها وصل شد؟
I'm glad that you asked this question so I can at least clarify this falsity that the Iranian government is using, because as you know, the founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, was exiled by two Muslim leaderships. One was the Qajar Iran and one was the Ottoman Empire. And he was exiled first to Iraq, then to other places of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, Edirne, and which was Acre in what was Palestine then. And that's where he died in 1892. And that's where he's buried. And that was way before anybody was even thinking of the state of Israel. And now, the place where he's buried, the place where we have our administrative centers and our holy places, is Israel, is the state of Israel. So therefore, that's why we're there. But that doesn't mean that we have any connection with Mossad or anything else. As to being in contact with foreign governments, well, as I mentioned, of course, the Baha'is in their countries, they have contact with governments. But that doesn't mean that that they're spies. Of course, I am a French citizen. Of course, I have contact with my French government, with the French government. The American Baha'is have contact with the American government. But that is no reason. So, of course, you know that these are all excuses. But it's good excuses because if not, there are no other grounds. I mean, this shows, ultimately, at the end of the day, this shows that the Iranian government persecutes the Baha'is only for their belief, because they have no real reason to put these people who are in prison, so they have to make up these falsities in order to have a reason to put them into prison.
اگر در چند جمله بخواید که وضعیت فعلی بهائیان در ایران رو توضیح بدید، چگونه است الان وضعیت فعلی بهائیان؟
The Iranian government is trying to make life for the Baha'is impossible, and this is pursuant to the 1991 document that was signed and ratified by Ayatollah Khamenei, which deals what should happen to the Baha'is. And I think that basically the Baha'is are not allowed to go to university. They're not allowed to work. As you know, they're not allowed in the public sector and the private sector. Now they're confiscated, their properties are confiscated. So basically, they're trying to economically suffocate the Baha'i community, as well as they're being put into prison. As well as you mentioned yourself, in the television and in the radio, there are campaigns of incitement to hatred against them, so that agents who are not publicly belonging to the government are allowed to destroy Baha'i cemeteries. You know, Baha'is are not even allowed to bury their dead. You know that there were cases of Baha'is who were in the morgue waiting to be buried for weeks long because they were not allowed to be buried. What does that have to do with anything if it's not for religion? So, and of course, as you know, there are more than 100 Baha'is in prison in Iran at the moment, including the 7 members of the Yaran who were trying to manage the affairs of the Baha'i community.
اگر بخوایم که چند تا اسم نام ببریم که بیشتر از همه الان در خطر هستن توی ایران، چه کسانی هستن؟
You know, there are women who have small children and who are in prison in Semna. There are families who have small children who both husband and wife are in prison. There are gentlemen who are old who are in prison. There are some who are sick who are in prison. So I think that it is not possible to name one name, because every case, if you look at it, is a case that is really creating a lot of pressure both on the individual who is in prison, but even more so for his or her family that is outside. So I think that ultimately it is not, there is no justice when somebody is in prison for having done nothing but trying to serve his own community and his fellow Iranians around him or her.
در سالهای اخیر اتفاقات زیادی در عرصه سیاست در ایران افتاده و جناح‌های مختلف به ترتیب فرما شدند. آیا شما تفاوتی بین اصلاح طلبان و غیر اصلاح طلبان و در واقع محافظه‌کاران می‌بینید در برخورد با بهائیان؟
I think that the discourse changed a little bit during those times and now again. But unfortunately, the situation remained the same. For example, if we look at the access to university, the form of the concours changed. So indeed, Baha'is or any Iranian was no longer required to state his or her religion in order to pass the exam of entrance to the university. But at the same time, the Baha'is, once they're identified, now they can pass the exam and get very high grades, like this young lady just did this year, and yet then not be allowed to go to university. So ultimately the end result is still the same. But maybe the discourse is quite different.
اسمش چی بود؟
Her name was Shadan Shirazi, and she was ranked at 113 in the exam, in the concours.
پس در واقع شما هیچ تفاوتی نمی‌بینید بین اصلاح طلبان و محافظه‌کاران.
You see, the problem is that, again, as I mentioned earlier on, how do you weigh human rights violations? Can you say that things have improved because nobody has been killed? Yes, of course you can. But at the same time, as long as people cannot have a decent living, well, clearly it's better than being killed, but you can't really value it as an incredible improvement. So of course what we can say is that there were some times where there were less prisoners. There were some times, there now has been on many years that no Baha'i has been officially killed, but at the same time the number of people in prison has raised tremendously, and the Baha'is are still deprived of their rights as normal Iranian citizens.
آیا تفاوتی کرده بین دوران روحانی تو این 1-2 سال تا قبلش؟
Unfortunately, as I mentioned, Mr. Rouhani has talked a lot about his charter for citizenship rights, and how every Iranian citizen is, and also other Iranian authorities have said the same, that the Baha'is should also be have all their rights under this citizenship right, but it's not the truth. If you can't go to university, you don't have citizenship rights. If you can't work in the public sector, you don't have citizenship rights, let alone if you are in prison.
و بهایی همچنان ممنوع خروجن.
No. Baha'is can leave the country. They have now, it's been some years, that Baha'is are able to obtain passports and to be able to leave their countries. Of course, there are specific individuals who are not allowed to leave, but as a whole, being a Baha'i doesn't prevent you to leave the country.
شاید این یه جور سیاسته برای اینکه تشویق بکنن که بهایی از کشور خارج بشن.
Perhaps that could be very correct.
در این 36 سال گذشته با تجربه‌های مختلفی که در مورد جامعه بهائیان در ایران رخ داده، شاید سوال سختی باشه، ولی آیا شما به نوعی اصلاحات در درون رژیم جمهوری اسلامی هنوز امیدوار هستید؟
I think that every government has the capacity to improve its human rights situation. Because it is always a win-win situation. There is no counter to improving a human rights situation. Therefore, I think it is really left to the government, and I think that it's in the capacity of each government to be able to change and improve its human rights situation. And therefore, if the Iranian government decides to improve its human rights situation, human rights is not for everybody except a group of people, whether this group of people be an ethnic group or a religious group or women. I mean, human rights is for all regardless of their differences. And so therefore, if the Iranian government chooses to follow that path of improving its human rights, then clearly the rights of the Baha'is will also be improved. And I think that this is totally in the hands of the Iranian government, and they have the capacity to do so.
در حال حاضر چقدر توجه افکار عمومی جهانیان و سازمان‌های بین‌المللی به مسئله بهائیان در ایران جلب شده و چقدر این قضیه رو جدی تعقیب می‌کنن؟
I think there is of course support from a lot of people. There has been support by many countries. There have been support by non-governmental organizations. I think that has been also a campaign that was launched around the documentary of Maziar Bahari called To Light a Candle. And I think that has generated a lot of support for the access to education for Baha'i youth, to higher education for Baha'i youth. So clearly I think that there is a lot of support, and I think that support is not only outside of Iran. We have to also talk about the support inside Iran, because that support is far more difficult, far more costly, I think, for those who support the Baha'is. It's much easier to support the Baha'is in the US or in the UK or in Switzerland or in France than it is to do from inside Iran. And I think that the human rights defenders who do that, and also the individuals, because there are, of course, prominent human rights defenders who support openly the Baha'is, and I think that they should be really commended for that. There are lawyers who represent the Baha'is and who are now in prison, like Mr. Abdul Fattah Sultani, just because they have represented Baha'is. And I think that there are also individual Baha'is, individual Iranians, neighbors, friends at university, parents of children, who actually openly state their disapproval of the policy of the Iranian government. And I think that all that is, of course, extremely important, because that is what will make the change.
در مورد ایران پس شما نقش سوشال میدیا مثل فیسبوک و چیزهای دیگر رو دارای اهمیت میدونید برای اینجور آگاهی بخشی به جامعه ایران، برای اینکه از اقلیت‌ها حمایت بکنن؟
I'm not in Iran, so I can't really say what the impact of, social media like Facebook in Iran has, especially when we know that it's filtered. Of course, we know also that Iranians are quite good at going beyond those filters. But I mean, I don't have the capacity to be able to say how is the impact. But certainly, I think that any means of communication that can allow, I think there are two steps. One step is to talk about the violations of the Baha'is, and the other step is also to talk and to be able to allow Baha'is to respond to all these falsities that are produced by the Iranian media, and where, although it is in the press law of the of the Islamic Republic that there is a right of reply, Baha'is are not given the right to go and respond, to say, well, you say this, but I have something else to say. You say that we have these particular behaviors. I can tell you that this is not true. Why don't you come? Why don't you talk to us? And I think this is very important, because it allows people to think for themselves, individuals, and make the choice for themselves.
برای مردمی که یا افراد یا سازمان‌هایی که علاقمند هستن که تو این زمینه کمک بکنن، به نظر شما فوریت توی چه موضوعیه؟
Again, it's very difficult to talk about urgency when there are so many grave human rights violations. So I think that each one has sometimes a preference for a particular subject, sometimes the capacity to bring forward that particular subject. And I would say that it's really left to the choice of the individual or the groups to decide on which subject they want to work. Unfortunately, the violations are so grave that you have a large choice. And so therefore I think that any step in any of the fields would be a very, very welcome and useful step. And is a very welcome and useful step.
با این اوضاع و احوال شما آینده رو چطور می‌بینید؟
You know, as a Baha'i, I believe that the future of Iran is great. But I don't know when that great future will happen. But I think I'm very hopeful because I have no doubt that the future of Iran is great.
شما به آینده در واقع نسل جدید که به نظر میرسه یه مقداری در مورد مسائل مختلفی که شاید تو دهه قبل براشون خیلی مهم نبود یا بحث نمی‌کردن دربارش، مثل محیط زیست، مثل همجنسگرایان، مثل اقلیت‌های مذهبی، مسائل مختلف، وضعیت حقوق زنان دارن حالا توی سوشال میدیا، توی فیسبوک جهان بحث می‌کنن. پس شما به آینده این نسل جدید امیدوار هستید؟
Certainly, I think that there has been a great change in the human rights discourse. And by human rights, I take it the same way that you do, which includes, you know, the environment, includes accepting the diverse minorities, differences, accepting, you know, of course, the rights of women, etc., etc. So I think that there has been a great, great advancement in the Iranian community in the discourse about human rights in general and about acceptance. There is still a way to go. I think there are a lot of things that slowly, slowly together we can try to improve in our thinking, in our behavior, in the way that we behave with one another, particularly in trying to achieve more collaboration, more unity. I think that these are issues that certainly we will all learn together how to improve. But of course, I'm extremely, extremely positive and hopeful about the future.
خانم دیان علائی، خیلی متشکرم از این وقتی که در اختیار ما قرار دادید.
Thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye. These are the latest publications that our office have prepared. Of course, this one is the most recent, which is about the how Iran has not implemented all the commitments that it had made concerning the Universal Periodic Review. So, but of course, the other ones are about the incitement, media hatred campaign in the media that we have talked about earlier on. And this one is about the case of the Baha'is in Semnan, which is one of the cities where there has been a lot of attacks against the Baha'is. And finally, the violence that were committed with impunity in Iran. So these are the documentations that the Baha'i International Committee prepares in order to document the persecution of the Baha'is. This is the place where the entrance of the place where Baha'u'llah is laid to rest. And so, and this is the ground around it. And so therefore, for example, this is an Accra. Yes, I will be coming to the UN I think what time is it now? Yes, I should be coming now in the next hour. So okay,
متشکرم.